Okie doke, so before we get into actually sculpting our landscape, you may notice when you zoom out, it is really easy to not really have a size reference. So my character is actually this big. So, but it's easy to do once you start scaling out. You might sculpt something up and it'd be just way too ginormous or too small even. So the first thing I like to do is in my landscape folder, we need to set up a scale reference that we can kind of paint everywhere. So I'm going to create a blueprint class of an actor, and this is going to be my scale model underscore BP. Now I'm just going to double click and open this up, and all it's going to get is a skeletal mesh. And I'm just going to put the mannequin. Doesn't matter which way he's facing. That's all he needs right there. So inside the foliage editor, we can add a foliage type. And right here under create new asset, you can either do an actor foliage or a static mesh foliage. I'm going to do an actor foliage type that I'm also going to save into my landscape folder. And it's going to be my scale foliage underscore FT for foliage type. Save that in here. Now it won't have anything, but right over here, if we highlight it on our foliage asset browser thingy, under the actor class, we can set it to what we want. So it's going to be my scale model blueprint. And then you can paint that right on the screen. So for my paint density, I'm going to set it to like 0.1. Brush size way up. That might be too many. Maybe 0.05. But then we can just kind of paint them all over the board. And then everywhere we go, we've got a little actor reference there to let us know if we're on the right track with our scaling. So I saw this in a video once where somebody had these all painted around. I was like, that's a brilliant idea. I should adopt that. Because I always have that issue. I always paint or sculpt too big to begin with. But you'll see, since they're the same size as our character, we'll be able to just sculpt up. And the best part about doing it like this is, like, let's say I sculpt this area. They come with it. So since they're attached to the landscape, they move right on up with it. Alright, but before we get into all that, the next thing I like to do to kind of orient myself and give myself a goal is, well, first I like to take all the edges down. So in the first tutorial series, I think we built them all up and then put walls basically around the entire thing. But that can really make the game feel kind of claustrophobic and a little bit kind of of course it's artificial, but you know, it makes it feel more artificial. So what I like to do now is I take a section and I sculpt down. Then I'll switch over to my flatten brush, and then you can click this little box right here. It'll give you a flattened target. So then you can use this little eyedropper and pick a point anywhere on the map, and you'll see how that little grid kind of moves around to match it. That is how we can actually pick where we want our flatten tool to take it to. So if I click anywhere, it'll just automatically do just straight down to there. So first thing I like to do is I like to go into my top orthographic mode, scroll way out, and I know it's hard to see when it's in like this, so what you can do is right here next to the viewport type select, you can go to the wireframe and either do lit or unlit. I do lit because apparently that's cool now. I don't know, I'm old. But yeah, I like the way the lit looks, so the unlit looks alright too. I usually do this part before I get into the material though, so it makes it a little bit easier to do it in lit, but really unlit either works just as well. So I'll just go all the way around and kind of define my continent, I guess you would call it. More like an island, I guess, because mine's a little smaller. But just going all the way around and kind of taking everything down. So boom, boom. All the way up. All the way back to there. Alright. So once I have the border line all the way down, what I like to do then is I usually section it off into different areas. You don't have to. I'm just like going over my process. Just to add some variation. So for instance, I'm just going to get rid of basically all that right there. And then kind of round out that curve so it's not just straight up edge. And then I'll take this part and just kind of section off a piece. And then kind of similar thing over here, except for this will be like a lake or something. And then I just kind of round off the edges because, you know, no island is going to, or no real continent is just going to be jagged edges all the way around. So I'll just do that. Kind of smooth off anywhere that looks like it's a river. Those would be kind of washed out at the ends. So we'll do just like that. And then I'll take off the edge of this one also. And that's looking a little bit more organic. I might just take this down a little bit further. But really, I mean, I encourage you, just go nuts. Figure out, like, part of my problem when it comes to sculpting is I do very little planning. I just kind of jump into it. It's like I would probably go a lot further if I planned more, but but I can't be bothered to do that. I'm sure, as you can tell by the low quality off the cuff essence of these videos. But I'll just kind of scrape off land, and then that's looking, you know what, that's alright. It almost kind of looks like a face, like if there was like an eye right here. It's like a face almost. But that's looking alright for now. Alright, so back over into my perspective mode, and now you can see it's a nice little... Where's my lake? There it is. It might be a kind of a small lake, but it'll work for now. Alright, so the next thing I like to do is I add the water that I don't have. Crap. Okay. Bear with me 1 minute. Oh, I don't have it open either. Alright, I'll do that in a minute. I'll be right back. Alright, just to show you real quick, inside the marketplace, if you go to browse, type in water, and then click max price free, there is, what is that? Day, night cycle, random thunder. Okay, well that's interesting. But these are the planes that I'm going to be using. They are free, part of the epic content. These are also really nice, but these are the ones I'm using. So that looks pretty good, and that's, you just, you know, add it. So, but okay, back on this side, and now I've got my water plane pack. So what I'm gonna do is go to my lake folder, blueprint folder, lake water, drag it out, and then with it selected over here we can set the water scale X and the water scale Y. So I'm gonna set that to like 5,000. Whoa, not 5,000. That's too much. Maybe 2,500. Maybe 1,000. Maybe even less than that. 750? No. Better 1,000. Alright, and then 1,000 on the Y also. And then I'm just gonna reset it back to 000 for the location. And then now we've got water. So it's kind of It's a little bit tiled, but what you can do is you can play around this overall water scale, and we'll check it out. So right now it's at 512 and it's like that. Let me do 1024. It makes the waves a little bit bigger. Or you can go small. That's 256, yeah. Alright, it tiles it more. You can do 2048, and it's like an ocean almost. It does have, actually, there is one here called Ocean. I'm just not very much fan of that one personally, but I mean, if you like it, go for it. But for my project, I'm just gonna use this one. Now what we can do, because it's kind of moving a lot, the wave speed, we can set that to like 0.25. Give it a nice calming ocean. Now you notice there's these little splotches right here. That has to do with the variation amount. So if I set that to 0, those go away. But if I set it to 1, then it's just basically all splotch. So what I like to do is like 0.1. That way it's out there somewhere, but it's not everywhere. So that's looking nice. Okie doke. Alright. And then what I like to do is I'll go back up into my top orthographic mode. It's gone. Well, I'm going to highlight my water and then just click that eye. So if you can't see your landscape, that's because water might be overpowering it. Just this little eye will hide it. So then what I like to do is in my landscape editing mode, I'll go into paint, find my dirt, brush size, let's say 500, and then I'll just kind of figure out places that I want things to be. So, like for instance, I'm thinking that this would be kind of cool to have as like a little sealed off dungeon that the player can get to at some point. So I'll just mark this like with a circle for the dungeon. And I'm thinking that like right over here, let me zoom in a little bit so I can see my little people. So I'm thinking right over here would be a good, like a town, because towns would normally be like near a port. So I'm going to just kind of, there's my town. Now my player's house could be, you don't want it too far from the village, because then it gets frustrating for the player to have to trek back and forth, but you don't want it too close, because it's like, why not just make it part of the town? So I'm thinking somewhere like right here, that way they're close to the lake, close to the town, about halfway in between. Now all this is going to be like hunting grounds. Of course the lake is going to be like fishing spot when we get to that point. But yeah, so that's what I just kind of do that. Kind of paint out where I want things to be. Little bit of planning, not too much. It's probably better the more planning you do, but I'm also super lazy when it comes to that kind of thing. So, it's like Gemini Man. Okay. But then what I'll do is I'll jump in and just kind of run around. Boy, it would be handy if we added a sprint button, wouldn't it? So that might actually be kind of big for the... Oh, that's not the town. That's why that's like that. That's the wrong direction. Okay. That might not be big enough for the town. So let's do like this. Since the player's house is going to be right here, I'll probably just move her over here. Oopsie daisies. Alright. That is not the player. That's the player. Get out of here. Alright, so this is where the player is going to be. There's where the town. That doesn't look too much of a trek. Alright, so then what I like to do is I'll go back to my sculpt mode, And this is my favorite tool. Let's make sure this video is not going on too long. Well, it's hard to tell because I've got like 3 different sections of it now. But my favorite tool, by far, has got to be the noise tool. It is fascinating and I love it. So what it does is it just adds a bunch of variation. So like, oh, it's not doing anything. Did it do anything? Oh, okay. Let me just undo all that. Set item. Oh, no. Okay. Alright, so for the noise mode, I'm just going to set it to add. You can do both at once, but I like to separate them into different processes. So like if I paint out now, then you'll see it's kind of like the sculpt tool, except for it adds variation in places. So if I increase my brush size, set my tool strength way low, so I'm thinking like 0.05, and then sculpt around, then jump in, you'll see it adds kind of a I forgot to set that my player uses this one, so let me do that real quick. Auto possess player 0. Okay, so now if I jump in and look around, you'll see it kind of adds variation to the landscape and makes it really easy to have a more natural approach, in my opinion, than the sculpt tool, because the sculpt tool kind of drags everything linearly up. It may have a fall off, but it's still going to smoothly go to the same point, whereas the noise tool can actually be like you can use both, and let me just show you what that does. So it'll go up and down at the same time, and it adds a nice little effect and gives it a real nice kind of realistic landscape effect. And it just looks a lot nicer than just having like a flat landscape. So just that quickly it added that nice variation to it. I personally like to separate them into add and subtract methods, because then you can control it better. Because if you have it on both and you have your water like that high, then it doesn't take long before you've developed another accidental kind of lake. Let me just flatten everything. Do editing, landscape, noise. Let's see. Let me just flatten everything back out real quick. Okay. Ooh, careful. Not too close to the edge with that. Alright, so back to the noise tool, and I'm going to set it to 0.05 again. Now this, I'm going to set it to add. Now this noise scale is also a fascinating tool, so, or a fascinating setting. So this will adjust the size of your, well basically it's like adjusting the resolution. So if I set it to like 32, then you'll see it it adds more variation to the elements, but it's not as smooth, so it's really that one works pretty well for like if you're doing a mountain. So let me set my brush size to 2000, my tool strength to 0.01, noise scale to 32, and then when I come over here and I just scuff it up a bit, maybe I need to take my tool strength. I prefer going low tool strength as opposed to higher, because then it gives you a lot more control rather than everything just kind of jumping up. But so you can add fairly nice looking mountains just right off the bat with it. And then of course we'll go over some other tools, but you can do just like that and that looks pretty good. Or you can set this noise scaler to like 256, and then it spreads out the jaggedness of it to where it kind of gives it more of a sloping So if I set my brush size to 1,000, and then I come way over here to where I want, actually let's set it to 2,500, and then just increase the fall off, so 0.75, 0.01 on my tool strength, and then I can just kind of give it a light touch. I don't like to do too much. You don't want it to be too jagged or anything like that. Just a nice, because these would be like a hunting ground plains is the theory going over here. So you can just kind of sculpt around, and so it'll add some nice variation for you. Now one thing I do like to do is I usually like to have at least one really tall mountain. That way if the player's out in the field and they're lost, or they just got disoriented for a second but they don't want to have to open the map and then try to figure out, they can just like look at it and go, oh okay, I know where I'm at, and then they know which direction they need to go. So points of interest and, you know, reorienting things is a really good thing to have. So another thing that we can do with this mountain over here, one of my other favorite things to do, is this flatten tool. So we've used it a couple times, but let me show you something. So for the you can set the tool strength or the flatten mode to be raise or lower. I don't know what these two do. I tried them. They don't do crap for me. But you can raise or lower, so you can pick a spot. For instance, if I pick right here and then try to lower it, it'll lower everything to that point, but it won't raise anything. Likewise with the raise, I can pick a spot and then it'll raise the ground to that point, but no higher. So if I jump this up to 0.1, and then I can just kind of sculpt around, picking random spots, and it'll just add kind of little terraces, which you would think would be what that other terrace setting does, but I don't know. So you can do like that and kind of add some nice look to it. And that's looking pretty cool, pretty nice. And then thankfully these little dudes are here, so I can kind of keep track. So I'm going to just kind of go briefly over all of them so I don't take up too much of y'all's time with this video. But the hydro tool will let you kind of erode things as if it was being rained on. So it adds like a little bit of, I don't know if you can really tell a difference here. Let me set my brush fall off to 0.5, brush size to 1,000, and then it's actually, that's right, this one is the one that I noticed a smaller brush size seems to work the best for. So like let's say I want this side to have a little bit of a hydro erosion effect to it, like it's been exposed to a lot of rain, it's taken all the soil and taken it down. So I would actually want a smaller brush than the size of the wall so that I can effectively hydro out the parts I want. That way it leaves what's the word? The height of it, while adding a little bit of effect to it. So you can I haven't used this one very much, but you can adjust the rain distribution size, the sediment amount that the water can carry. So like it's at 0.3, but if I set it to 1, then it'll take all that sediment down. And that's basically what it's doing right here. So you see it kind of moves the texture. It's basically taking this part and then moving it straight down. So the rain amount will move that up. Make it a heavier rain, more effective in its distribution. So you basically paint up, paint down. Oh crap. All that jazz. Another good one is this erosion tool, which similarly I like to use a smaller brush. adds a little bit of more sheer cliff side to it. So, like, let's take a look at a before. Let's see. Let's find a good smooth slope. So let's so yeah, this kind of has like a more slopey type look to it. If I take this and I just kind of paint around right at the base of the texture, then it takes that slope out. Then I can hit it with my hydro tool, and it adds some really nice variation to it to make it look less slopey and more rocky. So let's set this to 100. Sediment that the water can carry, we'll set that back to 0.3. Rain amount 128. Oh crap, okay. So yeah, instead of it being all slopey, it gets a nice little cliff face to it. Just makes it look pretty nice. So that's all slopey again. If I paint around right at the very base of it so I don't affect this part too much, I can take that slope out, go to my flatten tool, and then just kind of embrace the cliffiness of it. And then you go back to your hydro tool and just kind of, whoa, that's the wrong tool. Erosion tool, whoa, that's the wrong tool too. Okay. Well, you can just kind of knock it out a little bit. And then just like that. So yeah. Now the visibility tool we can't use, but this is good for like later on. We'll probably add a mask so that we can actually add a cave or something. Now this re-topology tool, but what the visibility tool is, you can actually paint holes in the terrain that you can actually pass through, so it'll make it invisible and take the collision off of it. Now this re-topology tool, I thought for a long time didn't do crap, but it actually does. Sorry, I have a chest and throat condition that makes me do that. I apologize. But what the re-topology tool does is if I go into wireframe mode, then you can see how some of these, well, it's hard to tell, but some of these square or triangles are stretched out and skewed a bit. So if I do this, you'll see the triangles are shifting. But if I go back into lit mode, the actual landscape isn't. So what this does is it's just readdressing the UVs on the landscape without altering its shape. You can just stretch out some of the textures and make them look a little bit nicer. So if you've got like texture stretching, and then you hit it with that brush, you'll see the textures are kind of readjusting themselves, but it's still maintaining that sheerness of the cliff. So it's not something that I would lean into too heavy, because I have a few times and then it'll just start to develop black lines all over it, and then sometimes the seams will actually tear and cause holes, and it'll actually be like you got two separate pieces of terrain at that point. But you know, these are all really powerful tools that just play around with them, figure up something. And so like for instance, you can just kind of sculpt around with that flatten brush, or you can set your target. Let's say I want over here another mountain, so I can just set it up to be like that, and then I can uncheck that flatten target, set my brush a lot smaller, and then add little plateaus on it. It's really, you know, they got really powerful tools for their sculpting. This is probably already way too long of a video, so I'm going to cut it here, and then we'll go over foliage tools in the next one. But hopefully this was interesting and didn't take up too much of your time, so I will see y'all in a bit.